Not long ago, one of my friends posted a video titled, "The Truth About Guns, Number One with a Bullet." The presenter pointed out that the USA does indeed have the highest per capita gun ownership rate in the world, but also that the USA does not rank number one in murders. In fact, it ranks not 1, not 2, not 3, 4, 5, not 10, not 20, not 50, but 111th in per capita murder rate. We're number one with a bullet. As I watched the video, a few things jumped out at me. First, he was using data from Wikipedia, so I went to Wikipedia and found the two tables he used. The gun ownership numbers come from the Small Arms Survey done by the Graduate Institute of International and Developmental Studies in Geneva, Switzerland, while the murder numbers come from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Now, these don't sound like two organizations I would expect a gun enthusiast to put a lot of faith in, but the other presenter did quote them, and by doing so, he told us all that he thinks these are reliable numbers. So I'm going to use them. The second thing I noticed was that as he went by the countries that were number 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 20, 50, and 100, I wasn't seeing any countries that I'd want to live in anyway. Even if they had the murder rate of Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, they're crappy places to live. I mean, look at the list. Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, 3 countries racked for decades by civil wars, domestic terrorism, and drug violence. Unfortunately, the rather ill-informed presenter referred to Honduras as socialist gun-controlled Honduras. If you go to Wikipedia, a site he obviously can find, and look up Honduras, you'll find that Honduras is the only word he got right. I'll come back to this. Meanwhile, Venezuela's problem isn't so much socialism as dictatorship and hitting the limits of growth in an extractive economy. And if we scroll down from there to number 10, 20, and 50, it pretty much looks like the map of sub-Saharan Africa with a smattering of Central and South American failed states and a few Central Asian basket cases thrown in for good measure. None of these is my idea of a vacation spot, although I'm sure hotels are cheap. The third thing I noticed was, where's Europe? Where are Canada and Australia? Where are the developed countries? None are higher than the US in per capita murder rate. Here we are at 111, so let's keep scrolling down. Nope. 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 What does it do to your ego to find out that Vietnam and Liberia have lower murder rates than the United States? Nope. Nope. Hey, there's Norway with just over half our per capita murder rate. Only that's actually misleading. The normal murder rate in Norway is about 1/3 of this amount. The table we're looking at includes summer of 2011, when a heavily armed Norwegian wacko decided the best way to keep Norway from being overrun by Muslims was, wait for it, you guessed it, murder 77 unarmed Norwegians. Since then, he's announced that the best way to beat cancer is to kill all your healthy cells. So if we take those numbers out, Norway is normally much lower down the table. So let's keep going. Nope. Nope. There's Israel. Hey, Canada, Finland, we're getting warm. Notice that their per capita murder rates are less than half of that in the United States. And here we are. We found Europe. Australia, a quarter of our murder rate, right next to, well, China. Hey, aren't they socialist and gun-controlled too? The ego's really taking a beating. UK, Italy, Spain, Netherlands, Sweden clocking in at 1/6 of our murder rate, and rounding out the table, Japan, Iceland, and Singapore, all with 1/10 of our murder rate or less. The real problem I had with the other video is that there was so much more the presenter could have done that he chose not to, so I will. First, what's the correlation between per capita murder rates and per capita gun ownership? Now, before I tell you, I'm going to do what the other one didn't do and caution you not to put too much faith in any one statistic. In spite of the catchy phrases you've heard, statistics don't lie, but they do oversimplify, which means it's dangerous to put blind faith in just one number. Instead, you really want to look at the same data 3 or 4 different ways to be sure of what you're seeing. So with that in mind, the number I'm going to give you is called a Spearman rank order correlation. It makes some assumptions about the data that could actually be violated but it makes fewer assumptions than the Pearson correlation coefficient does, so it's probably the safer choice with these data. Okay, here's the statistic. Per capita gun ownership by country correlates negative 0.25 with per capita murder rate. The negative sign means that as one goes up, the other goes down. So this number is telling us that as gun ownership goes up, murder rate goes down. And as gun ownership goes down, murder rate goes up. I hear the NRA celebrating already. But before you break out the bullet-filled piñata, there's another side to the story. Because a correlation of negative 0.25 is actually pretty weak. You measure how strong the correlation is by squaring it. The square of 0.25 is about 0.06. This means that per capita gun ownership explains only 6% of the variance in national murder rates. 94% of a country's rank on the table is explained by factors other than gun ownership. Already, by using all of the data, we've gotten to two useful conclusions. For those of you who want to ban or buy back or confiscate guns to lower the murder rate, forget it. Rates of gun ownership don't have that much to do with the murder rate. Even if you spent vast amounts of time, money, and political capital on outlawing types of weapons, you'd find a very disappointing result when you were done. It really is true. People don't kill each other because they're armed. They kill each other because they want to. But now to the other side. Gun enthusiasts. If you believe that the solution to the murder rate in the USA is for everyone to be packing heat, you're wrong too. Gun ownership has a very weak correlation to the murder rate. Sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. So the real problem with the whole gun debate isn't the idiots on the other end of the tug-of-war rope. The real problem is that both sides are tugging furiously on a rope that isn't connected to the problem. What if both sides dropped the rope and went looking for one that was actually connected to the problem? Not only could they do more good, they might discover that they both want to pull this rope in the same direction. We can make the point another way. Instead of using a correlation, let's put the national scatter plot up on the screen. Here it is. When you look at this chart, remember that each dot is one country. The left side has more guns, and the right side has fewer guns. Countries at the top have fewer murders, and countries at the bottom have more murders. So here's the USA, and as you can see, we have one close neighbor, almost identical on guns and murders. I wonder who it is. Oh, that's kind of embarrassing. Hey, isn't that the country that sent the goon squad to France to murder Charlie Hebdo for insulting the Prophet Muhammad? Let's keep exploring our neighborhood. Here are two countries which turn out to be Iraq and Uruguay, and Croatia and Equatorial Guinea, and Peru, Angola, and Paraguay. Really, our guns to murder neighborhood isn't looking like a place you want to brag about. In fact, if you just look at the very left-hand side of the chart, all those countries where the people own a lot of guns, how it looks to me is that the murder rate in the U.S. is just about as bad as it can get in a high gun ownership country. Almost all the other countries who have high gun ownership rates have lower murder rates than we do. So how about we explore the graph a little? Here's a spot in the center, has just about our murder rate, but with fewer guns. I wonder what country managed that. Oh, reality is getting very discouraging. But as my grandfather used to say, if you can't face it, you can't fix it. So let's plow on. There's a neighborhood in the upper right that has very low gun ownership and yet very low murder rates. Those countries are Japan, Indonesia, and Singapore. So some might say if we get rid of all our guns, we could be like them. But we could also be like Ethiopia or Rwanda. There's one more neighborhood worth looking at. What about the upper left? They have very high gun ownership rates, yet also very low murder rates. Who are these countries? Well, here are four of them: Sweden, Norway, France, and Canada. Did you know that Sweden ranks 9th in the world in per capita gun ownership? I didn't until I started on this video. But I think Sweden and Norway pretty much dispel the illusion that socialistic governments go after guns. On the evidence, they actually go after crime. But there are more countries in this neighborhood, and the one my father always talked about when he was lecturing on guns was Switzerland. Own lots of guns, and you'll have a low murder rate. I guess I can understand why he never talked about Iraq and Uruguay, who own lots of guns and have higher murder rates than we do. But why didn't he mention Saudi Arabia or Serbia? For that matter, why not Sweden? I think we've made the point that how many guns you own actually has very little bearing on how many murders you have. So what does matter? We can use El Salvador as a case in point. The popular wisdom is that the Central American countries have high murder rates because of the drug cartels. But actually that isn't a big factor. According to the people who work on these things, a bigger problem is local gangs. As we all know, gangs anywhere all tend to have the same mentality. Anything that isn't an outright ass-kissing is an insult. Anything that's an insult deserves a murder, and any murder needs retaliation. The real problem in Central America, including non-socialist, non-gun-controlled Honduras, is that the local governments and police forces are weak and corrupt, and as a result, gangs of thugs tend to take over patrolling most of the country. The police pretty much just guard the estates of the 1%. That's the problem in Brazil as well, and in most of the other high murder countries. So in 2012, the year that the numbers on this graph were gathered, the Roman Catholic Church in El Salvador did something about it. They brokered a peace agreement between the two major gangs in El Salvador. The result was a 70% drop in the country's murder rate in 1 year, which moves El Salvador from down at the bottom to looking a lot more like Barbados, all in one fell swoop. Maybe in your spare time, you could ask yourself why your favorite news outlet never told you about this. So if we actually wanted to do something about our national murder rate, and I'd like a show of hands of all those who like it high, we might decide to try tackling our problem with gangs. Is there anyone at all, who thinks that reducing the size, influence, and violence of gangs would be a bad thing? Maybe we could all gather around this rope and pull in the same direction. I actually decided to check out a theory I've held for a while. What's the connection between crime rates and political corruption? Well, it turns out it's pretty high. In fact, political corruption explains 25% of the variance among American states in violent crime rates, 4 times as much as gun ownership. Is there anyone out there who thinks political corruption is okay, that we wouldn't want to reduce it? Here's a graph showing the 50 states. As you can see, there's a strong trend from the lower left to the upper right. At the lower left are states high in crime and high in corruption, and the upper right has states that are low in both crime and corruption. And right away we see that there are 4 states in the upper left that buck the trend. Here they are. I don't know why these 4 states should have low corruption and yet high crime. Looking at them, 3 of them are western states where most of the people live in a few large cities. And in fact, this dot is Arizona. But this one here is Arkansas. And we still can't explain Delaware. So anyone with an idea to try out is welcome to experiment on these data. The low crime, low corruption states are here. Notice that New Hampshire and Vermont are almost twins. It would be hard to pick 2 states that had such different attitudes toward the role of government in society. This all by itself tells us how little socialism has to do with the issue of violent crime. And then in the lower left are high crime, high corruption states. So obviously, if we want to reduce violent crime in America, one of the things we should all start doing is reducing political corruption. Get rid of the perception and the reality that government is for sale to the highest bidder and that public servants are a pack of thieves, and crime may go down. More importantly, even if crime doesn't go down, political corruption will go down. What's wrong with that? So to sum up, remember what Thomas Aquinas said, beware the man of one book. Beware the person who's always pushing one idea. Beware the guy who quotes one statistic and stops. Beware anyone who scours a heap of messy facts to find one that matches preconceived ideas, instead of looking for ideas that offer a direction in a world of messy facts. There's a lot more that I could say, but it'll have to be in some other video. And be sure to look at the comments. It'll be easy to see who didn't watch the whole thing.